He stared in horror at the scene unfolding before him. Even the world's tallest peak, Mount Everest, was being swallowed by floodwaters. Yet the monk showed no fear. Instead, he stood face to face with the towering waves. He rang the final bell of morning, a warning that the end of the world had arrived. As Anna was preparing breakfast, the entire house suddenly began to shake violently. At first, she thought the earthquake would pass quickly, but then her ex-husband burst through the door, shouting at them to leave with him immediately. Sure enough, the moment they stepped outside, the house collapsed behind them. Now they had no choice but to flee. Cracks were already spreading across the ground. The group decided to head for the highway. But what happened next left everyone stunned. A cement mixer truck plunged from the overpass. A massive fissure, dozens of feet wide, split the earth open, instantly blocking their path. Without hesitation, Jackson yanked the steering wheel. They narrowly escaped death by mere inches. But then another disaster awaited them ahead. A collapsed skyscraper completely blocked the road. With no way out, Jackson made a desperate decision. He drove straight toward the wreckage, and in the brief moment before the structure fully crumbled, they somehow escaped once again. After a harrowing journey, they finally reached the airport, only to discover that the pilot they had arranged to meet was already dead. Fortunately, Anna's current husband, Mike, had received flight training in the past. His skills were far from professional, but in a crisis like this, Jackson had no choice but to put him in the cockpit. The moment they successfully took off, the runway behind them began to collapse. For the time being, they had escaped immediate danger. Only then did Jackson finally explain what was happening. The truth had started 3 years earlier. Scientists discovered that neutrinos released during powerful solar activity were triggering unprecedented physical reactions inside the Earth, destabilizing both the crust and the planet's core. Their calculations predicted that in 2012, Earth would face a catastrophic global extinction event. After learning the truth, the president immediately contacted world leaders. Together, they launched a project known as the Ark Plan, and the people selected to board the Arks were exactly who you'd expect. Either the brightest minds in their fields, or the wealthiest people on Earth. Someone like Jackson. He was never supposed to know about any of it. But a few days earlier, he had encountered a man in Yellowstone who claimed the world was ending. It was from that so-called madman that he first heard about the Arks. At the time, Jackson dismissed it as nonsense. But everything changed that morning. His billionaire boss called him unexpectedly, demanding that he get his 2 sons to the airport immediately. The children accidentally let the truth slip while bragging.
We will live and you will die.
At that moment, combined with the earthquakes happening around the world, Jackson finally accepted the reality of the coming apocalypse. Now their only chance of survival was to return to Yellowstone and find that eccentric man, because he had once claimed that he possessed a map showing the location of Noah's Ark. Before long, they arrived at Yellowstone and found the man standing on a mountaintop. Just as Jackson finally learned that the map was hidden inside the man's vehicle, the massive dormant supervolcano suddenly awakened. As if the end of the world had arrived, flocks of birds frantically fled the area. Moments later, the entire mountain range began shaking violently. Schuer immediately sensed that something terrible was about to happen. He hurried down the mountain with his daughter, but the eccentric man, obsessed with the Mayan prophecy, chose to sacrifice himself. He turned on the radio station and began broadcasting everything that was happening. Before Schuer could make it down the mountain safely, the entire peak suddenly rose hundreds of feet into the air. The supervolcano that had slept for 600,000 years finally erupted. Fortunately, Schuer had just made it off the mountain in time. He honked the horn to signal his ex-wife not to leave. But at that very moment, the ground ahead suddenly collapsed. Schuer decided to take a gamble and slammed on the gas. Luckily, his gamble paid off once again. He immediately told his ex-wife and daughter to get on the plane. He still had to search the eccentric man's car for the map leading to the Ark. Just as Schuer found the map and was about to celebrate, a massive fireball suddenly crashed down from the sky. Beneath him was nothing but flowing lava. The children could only watch in despair as their father's car plunged into the abyss. But there was no time to mourn. Without hesitation, Mark started the plane. To everyone's surprise, Schuer was still alive. His wife quickly begged Mark to stop the takeoff. Schuer's tiny figure desperately chased after the aircraft from behind. With everyone's constant encouragement, he finally grabbed Anna's hand and climbed aboard. Seeing this, Mark immediately increased the throttle. The plane successfully lifted off the ground. At last, they escaped the pursuing volcano. While on board, Schuer examined the map and discovered that the Ark was located in Tibet, China. But they were currently in the United States. Obviously, their small plane could never make the journey, so they flew to Las Vegas instead. By then, the city had already been devastated beyond recognition. Fortunately, a large airport there had not yet been completely destroyed. After landing, they planned to find another plane that could take them to Tibet. However, the airport had already descended into chaos. All flights had been canceled. Just then, Schuer unexpectedly spotted his wealthy employer. The businessman revealed that he had a large aircraft, but without a co-pilot, pilot, his captain couldn't take off. Schuer immediately recommended Mark for the position, without caring about the security guards trying to stop them. Everyone rushed toward the airport. They eventually arrived in front of a Russian cargo plane. By then, huge clouds of volcanic ash were sweeping across the area. Everyone hurried aboard. But Mark was only an amateur pilot. Faced with the complicated controls, he had no idea where to start. Fortunately, with the captain's guidance, they managed to start the aircraft. However, the runway ahead had collapsed. There were less than 100 yards left for takeoff, and just as expected, the plane plunged downward.
We're going down! We're going down!
Even worse, the plane was on a direct collision course with a building ahead. Their hearts were in their throats as they fought to stay focused. By sheer luck and skill, they managed to avoid disaster. But there was another problem. The plane didn't have enough fuel to make it all the way to Tibet, China. When they tried to land in a nearby city to refuel, they were stunned by what they saw. The once famous city had become a sea of flames. Everyone was overwhelmed with despair. Just when they thought their journey would end there, they spotted mainland China in the distance. It turned out that shifting tectonic plates had dramatically shortened the distance they needed to travel. They were now much closer to the location of the Ark. Soon, they would finally reach it. But at that moment, one of the plane's engines began to fail. They had no choice but to make an emergency landing. In the middle of the crisis, the captain made a selfless decision. He chose to stay behind and keep the aircraft stable. He ordered the passengers to escape first. Schuel could only lead the others into a vehicle stored inside the cargo hold. They drove out through the aircraft's rear ramp. After a wild ride filled with violent bumps and skids, the vehicle finally came to a stop. But the captain wasn't as fortunate. After sliding uncontrollably across the terrain, the plane tragically plunged over the edge of a cliff. The explosion quickly caught the attention of nearby Chinese military forces. For a brief moment, everyone thought they had finally been saved. Instead, they could only watch helplessly. The wealthy passengers and their children were allowed to board the Ark. They, on the other hand, had no place on it, simply because they couldn't afford the enormous price of admission. The realization crushed everyone's spirits, but Schuel refused to give up. He urged the group to keep moving on foot. After traveling for a long time, they finally came across a truck. Although they couldn't speak the same language, an elderly woman kindly invited them to come along. To everyone's surprise, the truck was also headed to the Ark. The woman's eldest grandson worked there as a welder. Jack then told them about a ventilation shaft. It provided a secret way to get inside the Ark. However, the moment Tom realized they had brought so many strangers with them, his expression immediately changed. Anna could see the difficult position he was in. She pleaded desperately. She said that if necessary, only the children needed to be allowed inside. In the end, at the grandmother's insistence, Tom agreed to help everyone. Just as they were preparing to sneak aboard the Ark, the scientists inside received alarming news. The massive tsunami capable of swallowing entire continents was arriving far earlier than anyone had predicted.